brief presentation from George Bergman of our planning staff. George, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. To date, your board has convened 5 meetings to discuss the Midcoast LCP update project. On March 29th, your board embarked on a visioning process for this project by appointing a subcommittee consisting of Supervisors Gordon and Hill to prepare a draft set of principles that would guide remaining Midcoast growth. At the last meeting on this project, which was April 26th, Supervisors Gordon and Hill presented a document which they, working with planning staff, had prepared entitled Statement of Principles to Guide Midcoast Growth. The principles were intended and are intended to provide a framework for future project decision making. At that meeting, your board received testimony from the public on the draft principles, including suggestions for revision and refinement. Among the suggested changes that your board wanted included will shortly be shown on the screen. I have them. Well, I'll go over them and hopefully they'll come up on the screen. At the meeting, there were quite a few suggestions from the public, and at the close of the meeting, your board identified where you had requested would like revisions. Among those topics, there they are. The key suggestions were to incorporate the Coastal Act principles as related to the Midcoast, also to acknowledge the need of coastal visitors, whereas the prior principles had talked about coastal residents, also acknowledge coastal visitors, also clarify that incentives are preferred to reduce the number of substandard lots of the Midcoast. There was also a request from your board to more directly indicate that infrastructure capacity will be in response to LCP policy, not vice versa. Vis-a-vis that planning policy and land use policy will drive the provision of infrastructure, not the reverse. There was also a request from your board to acknowledge the ongoing efforts of the Transportation Authority and Caltrans to correct highway safety problems, not present it just like it's something new in the future. And then another, and finally for this list, request was to clarify that ocean views from public vantage points are the views that would be protected. And those are some of the requests, the key requests that came from your board and emanated from the public testimony on April 26. Since the last meeting, staff has worked with the subcommittee, Supervisors Gordon and Hill, to incorporate these and other suggestions where necessary, with the objective of developing a revised and refined set of principles. We have made these changes and others and done that, and I believe at this time Supervisor Gordon will next describe the changes that were made by the subcommittee and are today would constitute the revised principles.
Okay. George, I'm wondering if you could put up the there we go, the modified version. I'm not, if we could flip through this, because the board has it and the public has copies, but just quickly, this is what you see underlined is a new section. You want to move to the next one?
Okay. This is...
And here again, this was a section that we looked at last time. The underlined again are additions, and strikeouts are things that have been changed. The next set?
And there was no change for this set.
Okay, this was the set on...
the first part of how will the Midcoast grow.
Okay.
And then right here.
All right, and the last part of that, though, there are some changes.
Yes.
And next. This is the one on the infrastructure. And again, there were a couple of changes here.
Continuing with the infrastructure.
And the next set is on the siting and designing of Midcoast development. Again, in response to one of the comments, public vantage points has been added there.
And actually, for the last two sections, there were no changes.
And the last two sections are LCP land use changes and the role of regulation.
That's correct.
Okay. What I'd like to do at this point, then, George, is take the public testimony.
Okay.
I have 12 speakers, and again, everyone will be given 2 minutes. I'll call both the person who will be speaking and the person who will be on deck. We'll start with Lindell Erb, to be followed by Ken King.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'm here as the co-chair of E-TRAC, which is the Equestrian Trail Riders Action Committee. We're a coalition of about 10 different riding clubs and groups in the county. And we're very concerned that the plan does not seem to address the rezoning of the Caltrans access through the Montera area. This is an important trail for us because it's one of the few ways we can get through Montera from the coastal parcel behind the airport to the part on Montera State Beach on our horses without having to travel through city streets or Montera town streets. And we're concerned that this is something that has been left out of this, and we would like that addressed if possible.
Okay, thank you. Ken King, followed by John Birmingham.
Hello, Mr. President and fellow supervisors. I'm Ken King. Should I give my address?
No need to.
Okay.
We have it.
I wanted to speak in support of the Midcoast Local Coastal Plan, and in particular, I have a concern about what the Coastal Commission did 2 weeks ago in allowing these very large houses to be built on the Midcoast, and I'm sure you're aware of that. What was interesting to me in reading the Mercury account was that the commissioners did not want to specify house sizes. They backed away from that by a 7-3 margin, and I think they're asking that the local people, the county, oversee that process and set a limit. And one of the president of the Coastal Commission would have been comfortable with a 4,000 square foot limit on the size of a house, because the staff recommendations had to do with the effect on the surrounding agricultural land values, and how these mansions will cause the taxes and the whole infrastructure of the coastside to change over not very many years in our lifetime. The Coastal Act is really passed back many years ago to keep continuity for our descendants, and things are moving too fast now because of the abuse of building and mansions and this kind of thing. Finally, I just want to say that there are people way ahead of the curve on this. I've been following the Half Moon Bay LCP update very closely, but I realize I need to pay attention to the surrounds. Thank you for your attention to this.
Thank you. John Birmingham, followed by Catherine Slater-Carter.
Thank you for hearing me. I'm here today representing some of the parents that live in the coast. They have kids going to school. The high school has, according to them, has 1,057 kids going to their school, and they're all going to be looking for apartments. They want no change in the master plan. They want as many apartments built as possible in Montera, Moss Beach, and El Granada, so the kids have a place to stay. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, place to live.
Catherine Slater-Carter, followed by Chuck Kozak.
Good morning, members of the board, President Gordon. I want to make 3 points. One, I think it's important to make sure that in these principles there is not a fundamental rewrite of the underlying principles of the existing local coastal program. This was supposed to be an update of the coastal program, not a wholesale change. And I would, you might want to have County Council look at the recent court decision concerning Martis Valley, up near Truckee, where a project with 6,000 houses was just denied because of an inadequate EIR. If you go through with some of these changes, we may be increasing the build-out numbers without the adequate environmental review. You talk about voluntary compliance. We've had voluntary compliance with things like the local coastal the substandard lots for the last 20 years, and it didn't work. That's why we had to put in design review. That's why we had to implement floor area ratios. I think it's very, very important to have a legal and structural framework to implement and secure the rights of the community. Property rights should be implicit in any law that's written. I think it's one of the fundamentals of this country. But also are the fundamental rights of a community. That's why we have a democracy, so that the community can speak. I'm concerned that in your voluntary compliance, that perhaps design changes or commercial standards will cause changes without the community being able to have a say in what the ultimate product is. That's why, again, why we need strong implementing ordinances for not only the property rights, but also for the community rights of the folks who live there. Property rights at the expense of community rights and individual rights can be very dangerous. If you only give rights to the people who own large tracts of property, you deny the rights for the individuals who don't necessarily own property. Thank you.
Thank you. Chuck Kozak, to be followed by Jack Olson.
Morning, members of the board. Chuck Kozak from Montera. Thank you very much for the changes that you incorporated, especially bringing in the principles from the Coastal Act and including the visitors, who are a very important part of our economy. Looking through them, I still think these principles need a little bit more in the way of moderation, and by moderation I mean that they need to be balanced in terms of some of the issues, specifically regulations versus incentives, property rights versus community rights. I pretty much agree with everything that Catherine just said there. There's a specific need in there for the support and protection of coastal-dependent industries, which I don't see in there, specifically the fishing industry and other aquaculture-type industries that are dependent on the harbor. We have a working harbor. It's the only one for many miles up and down the coast. It's a very important resource that needs to be protected. There's not a specific principle in here for that, and that's a very important part of the Coastal Act. The opening principles that you have are very nice. There are some specifics in the Coastal Act, though, that do talk about the permanent protection of the state's natural and scenic resources, specifically why you're saying these principles, and to promote the public safety, health, welfare, and protect public and private property, wildlife, marine fisheries, and other ocean resources. And I think it'd be nice to kind of spell out exactly why you're planning the future of the Midcoast a little more specifically. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack Olson, to be followed by Bobby Hutcherson.
Good morning, President Gordon, members of the board. First, Rich, thank you, and Jerry for your hard work on developing the principles. They seem to be very well grounded on basis and seem to fit in with the process incredibly well. Looking at these, Farm Bureau fully supports a voluntary incentive-based program, and referring back to our prior letter, which has been shared with all members, we would again offer our services and resources to work with the affected landowners with the items of precluded activity that would occur on agricultural land, to work to put together a voluntary-based incentive easement program for the preclusion of those rights, and would be willing to undertake that at any time that the board would deem necessary to do that, to protect the integrity of those activities for agricultural and rural landowners. Thank you.
Thank you. Bobby Hutcherson, to be followed by Lenny Roberts.
Good morning. My name is Bobby Hutcherson, and this is my second time coming here. I've lived in Montera since 1972, and we've had many years of drought situations there, and I'd like you to know that it's very possible that our water level and table is going to go up and down. To be able to support new housing would be is going to be very hard. I think, as I've seen over the last 30 years of living there, 32 years of being there, and to let you remember thinking about destroying the beautiful area where people really come to the coast to see why, the openness of Montero, the beaches, the trails, the hiking areas, to have that all destroyed would be a horrible thing. And this is the reason why people come there, and just to have housing and development happen would just destroy the whole situation. And I hope you will agree with what I'm saying. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lenny Roberts, to be followed by Joe Chamberlain.
Good morning, President Gordon, members of the board. I'm Lenny Roberts. I'm speaking for Committee for Green Foothills. I just wanted to reiterate the fact that the principles are sort of an additional thing that you've added in here, and you need to be cognizant of the fact that the standard for review of this LCP, any changes, is the Coastal Act itself. So that should, as the subcommittee works on this, you need to be checking with all these policies against the Coastal Act and harmonize whatever you're doing with the Coastal Act. So I think that's your ultimate standard, and although the principles are helpful, I think that you need to keep in mind the Coastal Act. I just want to also add that I thought Chuck Kozak's letter to you was an excellent letter that points out the points that are being made today again. And I wanted to add one last thing about voluntary methods. Having observed planning issues for a long time in this county, the reason we have zoning and regulations and the reason we have the Coastal Act is that voluntary methods do not really work. There are certain places where incentives may be useful, but overall we need to have regulatory, clear zoning regulations so that people can all understand what the rules are and can harmonize their interests with those. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Joe Chamberlain, to be followed by April Vargas.
Good morning, President Gordon, honorable supervisors. Always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for your dedication and service to the people. Much appreciated. I'm here because I have 3 or 4 points I'd like to make in regard to the principles before you today. I want to go back, first of all, though, and say that to support the staff's recommendation. The staff are the people who work every day with this situation. They are the ones that are going to be before you as each individual thing comes up, and I recommend that you support their recommendations. They are excellent and in keeping with the needs of the Midcoast. I have concerns about the infrastructure, and I very much appreciate the principles. However, I find that we use the word will, that there will be sewers, we will be able to tell Caltran what to do, and I really appreciate that, but I don't think that that's the way it works. I don't think we're able to tell Caltran what to do. So I appreciate that the principles say in this section that these things will all happen. I don't think that they will. So I'm just wanting to point that out, because the infrastructure is really the serious point that we have here. As you know, for every house that we construct, it costs all of us. They don't pay for themselves. The fees don't pay for themselves. The cost of the infrastructure doesn't pay for itself. That cost is extended to the greater community. So I'd like very much to be careful about the infrastructure having to do with transportation and the water and sewage issues that are there, as well as open space. This is occurring at the time when the population in our county is decreasing. And to increase the construction on the coast side is just transferring the population from the bay side to the coast side. So I have to question investing our little money when we could use it on things like education, health, habitat for people that's affordable housing. And the Bayside really wants a rural coast. We see this because of Host and other organizations. So, again, support the staff. Appreciate it.
Thank you. April Vargas, to be followed by Paul Perkovic.
Good morning, President Gordon and members of the board. I'm April Vargas, and I, too, am speaking from the Coastside contingent of Committee for Green Foothills. I wanted to thank the staff for the revisions that were made to the April 26th document. I think on Maine, they were definitely an improvement over what was there before. And I echo the comments made in Chuck Kozak's letter. Once again, he's done, as you all know, incredible amount of work on this for years, and he's one person who understands the regulations in an incredible amount of detail and is then able to extrapolate them into a form that represents what the constituents of the Midcoast have consistently said for the 10 years I've been involved, what we want, and has been represented consistently by the Midcoast Council. And as you know, the Council and Committee for Green Foothills continues to support the staff recommendation. To put this in context, the fact that the Coastal Act was passed was a direct result of concerns of the people statewide about what would happen in the future and what the future of our coast would be. As this has moved forward for decades now, people's commitment to the coast increases in the state. Just 2 years ago, there was a study by the Public Policy Institute that said that the people of California would even pay more taxes to make sure that their coast was protected. I believe that that's a very strong message. And of course, we on the local level are the standard bearers for the coast that is right on our county. And I believe that it's the responsibility of all of us, and certainly yours, to take that mandate from the state of California and express it locally with what we know is best, what's going to protect our future. See, it's just not the people in San Mateo County that is involved. It's everywhere, and it's actually worldwide. I think you've been following probably World Environment Day, where we've got mayors of major metropolitan areas saying now that we've got to green our cities. We've got to do something different. You have a unique opportunity now to do what needs to be done worldwide, and we can do it here. So thank you.
Thank you. Paul Perkovic, to be followed by Alan Harris.
Good morning, President Gordon and members of the board. My name is Paul Perkovic. I live in Montara. In the next few weeks, your board will be going into budget hearings for the county. In the good old days, county departments could bring in their requirements in order to carry out county policy, and your board could set a property tax rate that would produce the revenue necessary to meet all of those goals for the county that would fit in with the vision of the Board of Supervisors at that time. Proposition 13 changed all that. It put a constraint on the amount of money available, and that meant that some of the things that were in the county's charter and county's plan for things that you would like to do had to be deferred or cut back. You could go to Sacramento and ask for more money, but often Sacramento said, sorry, we don't have it. You could go to Washington and ask for more money, but often Washington said, sorry, we don't have it. As you go into your budget hearings, it would be misleading to the public and irresponsible of you as a board to set up a guiding principle for your budgeting that said county revenue will be in response to county department policies, not vice versa. And yet, that's exactly what you're trying to set up in terms of infrastructure capacity on the coast side. In the good old days, we believed that resources like water were effectively unlimited, and you could build as much as you needed and it would always be there. But the reality today is that it simply is not there. We can't go to Hetch Hetchy and say, we need more water. It's like going to Sacramento and asking for more money for the county budget. The Hetch Hetchy system is already overcommitted, and the Montara Water and Sanitary District cannot simply go purchase water from Hetch Hetchy. We can't go to the feds and say, give us more water, because that, for example, the Colorado River project, which is federal, is vastly overcommitted. Promises have been made to cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix that use up all the water. We must be realistic and guide our plans based on what the available carrying capacity of the area is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Final speaker will be Alan Harris.
6 months ago, I was fairly naive. I thought that the Coastal Act protected the coast very well. But I didn't understand that one person in one government department could issue an exemption to let people walk all around those regulations. And it was a very disappointing thing for me. So I hope in your LCP that you make the exemption process public, difficult, and more than one person be involved. Because otherwise, everything that you do in principles, everything that you do in law can be overridden by one person. And I think that's really wrong. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate all of the members of the public for their comments this morning. What's suggested here is that the board this morning would move through and attempt to adopt these principles, perhaps in some modified form after further discussion, and then that these would be forwarded to staff and the subcommittee to see how the specific tasks that we had previous public testimony and hearings on could be aligned with these principles. And that package then would come back to the board as the final step in the adoption of this LCP update. My suggestion would be that the principles are organized by key questions, and maybe, George, if we could, on the overhead, put up the first key question, and my suggestion would be that let's deal with issues and language in that set, and once we're okay there, then we'll move to the next major question. Is that acceptable as an approach? Okay. So the first...
It'll be coming up shortly.
Okay. We'll wait for it to get up. And we need to... Okay. The first key question is why plan the Midcoast's future? There are 3 principles here that are new. Any issues or problems with these? Okay. Then we'll move to the next one.
Would you like to cross out underline or final form?
Cross out underline, I think. The next question is, will there be additional growth in the Midcoast? And there are 2 principles here, both of which were modified from the previous version. Comments on either of these? Yeah.
One of the questions that came to mind for me is on the second principle. The word permitted has 2 meanings, and to clarify that probably would be better to change that word to allowed development has occurred. Community growth when all allowable development has occurred. Permitted could either mean
allowed or permissible.
Yes, allowed or permissible, right?
That's fine.
Okay. I think permissible.
Permissible. I heard 3 permissibles up here. Let's try the word permissible there. So instead of permitted, the word would be permissible. Okay. Anything further on that one? Okay, the next major question is how will the Midcoast grow? And I'm not sure we can get all of the principles up there at one time, so we'll take the first 3.
There are no proposed changes for these 3.
Anything on those first 3? Okay, George, the next set then, under that same question, how will the Midcoast grow? Adrian.
I've been sort of grappling with this ever since I took the tour of the coast. I'm conflicted a little bit, if you will, or concerned that under the one that starts with methods will be used to prevent, I was
wanting to change that to methods will be used to discourage development on parcels that are too small. And then the last line, instead of mandatory methods will be considered, may be considered. Because as you get to the far end, the concern I have, we talk about affordable housing. And when I took the tour, the one thing I noticed, probably one of the only places you're going to see some of the affordable houses may be on some of these smaller lots. And what I also saw is some of them were dreadful, and some of them were really nice, and part of it really boiled down to design review. And to me, if the median price of homes now is $900,000 in our county, if we don't have some of these smaller houses on some of these smaller lots, I don't think you're going to get houses with a smaller price either. So I'm concerned about tying our hands. Part of this also falls into that whole issue of incentives. I'd rather discourage development on the parcels than absolutely prevent them, because I think that's still a component of some of our affordable housing. That's just, that just struck me as maybe being a little too restrictive.
Supervisor Church?
I think I have a little bit different of an approach than you, Adrian. I am concerned about the small lots and their compatibility with the surrounding development. And I tend to agree with some of the comments that were made earlier about the effectiveness of voluntary methods to merge lots. This particular bullet point suggests that voluntary methods are preferred, but it's difficult for me to come to that conclusion if I don't know what those methods are, and I won't be able to determine whether or not they're going to be effective. My approach would be to leave it open. When we have the hearing on this issue, staff should come forward with specific recommendations as to whether as to incentives that could be used, and it would be up to this board to then determine whether or not they're effective. And so I would be inclined to be a little more flexible at this point. These are general principles that we're adopting. We understand that the Coastal Act ultimately governs whether our LCP is valid or not. But these are supplemental assumptions and principles that are going to guide us as we move forward to update the LCP. My feeling is that the first sentence, methods will be used to prevent development on parcels that are too small. I think that's fine, and also including reducing the number of substandard lots, I think that's fine. The next sentence, however, I'd be inclined to say voluntary methods that let me restate that. Both voluntary methods that incorporate incentives and mandatory methods will be considered. And then we would make that ultimate determination at the hearing. And I would also be inclined to consider only voluntary methods that incorporate incentives if deemed effective.
Okay, we're kind of at two extremes there.
Well, let me ask a question. I think I know where Mark's going, because we talked about this last time. I think he's right. Until we know what incentives we actually could offer, we don't know if they're viable. And I absolutely agree with that. I guess my concern with the term prevent, I almost think we're contradicting each other. If you're going to have voluntary methods that could incorporate incentives, but in the first sentence you've talked about preventing them, I would say discourage, because it still leaves the option open of having those incentives. I guess what I'm really looking for, and I think we're really actually on the same page, is until we really know what incentives and if they could be effective and we can afford to do them and it's realistic for a county to provide them, this whole paragraph puzzles me a little bit, because it contradicts our affordable housing, and the first line sort of contradicts the last line, if you will, for the voluntary methods, if you say prevent versus discourage.
I think it's semantics at that point. I think discourage is fine. I don't have a problem with the word discouraged, but I would not rule out, or let me put it this way, I would not give a preference to voluntary methods over mandatory methods at this point. I think it would be premature to do so.
I agree, and I agree with you there. I think we're not there yet.
Writing on the screen.
All right, so let's try this. I think we've got some consensus to take the word prevent and change that to discourage. And then, George, I think what we need is some language that gives both the voluntary and mandatory methods at this moment the same level of consideration.
I think that Supervisor Church's wording does that. The language, both voluntary methods that incorporate incentives and mandatory methods will be considered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so you'll make that change. Okay. Anything else on this section? All right, the next major question is, how does infrastructure relate to Midcoast growth? And it looks like we've got the first 4 bullet points of this one up there at the moment. Comments or questions on this?
You know, one of the issues that thank you, Mr. President, that came to mind also is under the second bullet, new development in the Midcoast urban area will be served by water and sewer districts rather than individual wells and septic systems. What question arises from that is, if there will not be, or if in certain areas water and sewer will not be served or provided for 10 years because of infrastructure or the lack of, then what we're basically saying is that there will be no development in that area for that period of time. So I think that maybe a better choice would be changing the word will to should, in that new development in the Midcoast urban area should be served by water and sewer districts rather than individual wells and septic systems.
And I would agree with that. I think the whole premise behind this point here is to make the statement that individual wells are not a good policy, right, and that we should encourage water and sewer districts to provide sufficient capacity. So I would agree with that.
Okay, so George, if you would change the word will to should. Anything else on these first 4 bullet points? I think, George, you want to bring up the last 2? These are the last 2 currently on the infrastructure issue.
I have one comment here, and you have covered, I think, the infrastructure here with transportation and sewer and water facilities, but there is no reference to schools. And I wonder if we should have some reference here to schools as well. There is a reference to schools earlier in one of the other bullet points under how will the Midcoast grow, the 3rd bullet point. You state that the Midcoast will grow at a rate that does not inordinately overburden roads, water, sewer treatment capacity, and schools. So perhaps there should be a provision here that says that schools will provide and expand their facilities up to and not beyond the level necessary to accommodate Midcoast urban area build-out.
Okay. George, that's a long sentence to write up there. But Mark, you want to read that one more time so we can all hear it?
Schools will provide and expand their facilities up to and not beyond the level necessary to accommodate Midcoast urban area build-out. Got it?
Everybody okay with that? Okay. See a head nodding, so we'll add that as a new bullet point under this one. Yeah. Schools be sufficient for the moment, George. If we could move to the next major one then, which is how will new Midcoast development be sited and designed? There are 3 bullet points here, and they're all up there on the screen. Any issues or questions here? Comments? Then I think that one's going to be okay. We can move to the next major question. which is where will LCP land use changes be considered? Again, there are 3 principles here. They're all up on the screen. There were no changes from the previous submission. Any comments, questions, or concerns on these 3 bullet points? Okay. Thanks, George. The last major question is, what is the role of regulation in Midcoast planning? There are 2 bullet points here. Supervisor Church?
I think the first bullet point either has to be reworded or dropped in light of our prior change addressing that issue, that both voluntary methods and mandatory regulations will be considered. And I don't have a problem dropping it.
And if it were to be kept, I suggest possibly dropping the word before, and you could put along with mandated regular.
And that's fine. It's redundant, but that's fine.
Okay, so take out before and put along with. Anything else on either of these 2? I think what would be appropriate then, if it is the pleasure of the board, we've reviewed and by consensus indicated the changes, and George has captured those for us. What I think would be appropriate then would be a motion to adopt the statement of principles as modified this morning.
So moved, with thanks to you, Supervisor Gordon and Supervisor Hill, for working on this issue. We appreciate it.
Second.
We have a motion and second. This item will require a roll call, and we'll do roll call number 3.
President Gordon?
Aye.
Supervisor Jacobs-Gibson?
Aye.
Supervisor Tissier?
Aye.
Supervisor Church?
Aye.
Supervisor Hill?
Aye.
Thank you. That is adopted unanimously. At this point, we will refer these back to staff and to the subcommittee, as has been suggested. I do not anticipate that this item will come back to the board until July, and I would suggest that the staff and subcommittee meet and attempt to determine how quickly this can be put together in a way that we can give ample and sufficient notice to the entire community of the next scheduled hearing on these matters. I'm also going to suggest in that regard that we are, as a Board of Supervisors, so the public is aware, moving into one of the major tasks that we have to assume annually, and that's the adoption of the county budget. Over the next several weeks, the board, individual members will be very active in reviewing the proposed budget and meeting with various departments. And the last week of June, we will be in 3 full days of budget hearings. That's why I think we won't get to this much before July. It could even be early August before we would have a next hearing on this, I think, given the other issues the board will be dealing with over the next balance of this month at least. But what I would suggest is that staff and the subcommittee will meet, and as soon as some date can be determined, we will get notice out to everyone in as early as possible and with sufficient lead time for everyone to prepare. There are no other items to come in front of the board this morning. We therefore are able to adjourn, and this meeting is concluded.